Hey, everybody. Hello, and welcome to On the Road to DevHops. Y'all know what happens. I call up my buddy Bryan. We get together and we usually bring somebody in as a tiebreaker as we start to spar with each other. Bryan, do you want to introduce yourself and our guest for this evening?
I'm Bryan, and I occasionally type for a living. This is Maria Jennison. I had the pleasure of meeting during a company event last month in Las Vegas. We had a really interesting conversation. So I think we're going to talk.
Wait a minute. You invited a woman that you met in Las Vegas to the show.
Know.
I'm just putting it together there. How I'm hearing it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know quality when I find it.
Ooh,
I'm not from Las Vegas though, so there's that.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, but there's also that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, but the two of you were there, so can I get the story out of it? So challenge accepted, peeps, challenge accepted. So I got to ask, what are you drinking tonight, Maria?
So I am drinking a Granny Smith apple wine from a vineyard that we visited. I think it was shortly after the Vegas trip. I visited with my fiance and his parents. So
beautiful. Well, that gets even more interesting. So there's a fiance involved, and Bryan, and Vegas. Okay.
There is. And we're all very friendly.
Bryan, what are you drinking tonight?
I'm drinking from Little Rock, Arkansas, Rocktown Golden Promise Bourbon, which is quite tasty.
And now, do you have it on ice, or do you have those funky little cool?
No.
Oh, what do they call that?
Ice is for Coke.
Oh, do they call that neat when you drink a drink with no ice? Is that what that's called?
They do.
I'm learning the grown-up words. That's what's going on there. I'm learning the grown-up terms. In fact,
to be non-grown-up, I am drinking it in my Death Star glass.
That just makes you cool. That doesn't mean you're not a grown-up. It just makes you cool. So tonight I'm having the vodka and sparkling water. And in fact, those are little berries that you see floating in there. So thank you to Senior for making sure that I was well taken care of tonight. So
very, very festive.
Oh, right. Isn't it? I mean, it just says, Happy Easter. It's what it says. It just says Happy Easter. So there's a backstory here that I got to tease out. So we normally talk about, sometimes it's hardcore tech. Sometimes it's about the people around the edges. Sometimes it's about culture and psychology. And it sounded like the two of you had a meeting of the minds during a conversation. I'm dying to know, first of all, before I let you go there, why were you in Vegas?
So, the company I work for, Defense Unicorns, we are a 100% remote company, but we have planned gatherings where we get together and not only, discuss company stuff and strategy, but get to know each other. You can get to know each other a lot faster with body language in person than you can remotely. And there's people that you never ever get to see. And plus we're growing so quickly, you lose track of who works there, and so we were in Vegas doing that. And I met Maria at the bar the evening we were arriving. And, what do you do? Hey, introduce yourselves. And what do you do? And she was telling me what she did. And I found that fascinating because we had a lot of good parallels.
Well, so Maria, were you there in anything related to Defense Unicorns, or you just honestly just happened to meet?
So no, I was there also in relation to the Defense Unicorn meet.
Okay.
I came as a spouse. So yeah, I am not in the IT industry in any way, shape, or form, but I guess kind of used to be. So
tech adjacent.
Yes. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, exactly so.
All right. So got the formalities out. I feel a little bit better. I'm still like, they were at the bar. She's the spouse. Who's the other? I'm not going to ask you more questions. What I want to know, really want to know, Bryan was excited after he talked to you. And when that happens, Bryan will text me or hit me up on Slack like immediately. We got to have this person on. We got to have a DevHops with this person. It was like immediate. It was like this weird, and it happens every once in a while. You are our third guest for season 2. So we've been, I think we're 15, 16 different episodes in, and he was really excited. You were on the top of the excitement scale. So what I need to know, because he said this is going to be on the edge, it's going to be a little bit different. What sparked the conversation that got Bryan Finster so excited?
So Bryan he asked me what I did for a living. I told him I was in hospitality recruiting, but it was a question that he had asked me, and he told me to sit on it and think about it because I had to go run up and do some other things. But he had asked me, what's the hardest part about recruiting? And like, how do you know you have the right candidate? Somebody who's not, for lack of a better term, full of shit. And and I mean, that once I saw him again, we had the most amazing conversation about how, I had switched over from IT to hospitality recruiting just because in IT, that recruiting realm is so incredibly, like IT is, complicated and difficult. Also, not only in, how you do it, but in the recruiting aspect of it as well, because I feel like for me, IT people are so much more complex and just harder to figure out than, any other.
Nah. No, they're not. They're easier. You just have to measure them on the dork yardstick, whether they're dork, whether they're nerds. There's a whole Venn diagram for whether they're a dork or a nerd or a geek. Like there's a whole thing for that.
Yeah.
Why more complex though? Is it just the educational subject matter, or what would make that more complex? I find that curious.
And in the same sense that hospitality kind of relates to IT recruiting, it's like, if you go and look for an accountant, okay, an accountant works with numbers. They do very specific things, no matter what company they're in, industry, anything, always the same thing. In IT, it's like, there's very specific things that people need to know. Like, yeah, you might know Python, or you might know this, or you might know that, but they have to know it in such a specific form that it's like the people that know these things are much more complex than, let's say, a network engineer. It's like there's so many different complexities to what they do.
Got it.
It's hard to explain.
You're starting to make sense. You're starting to make sense.
I've been in this field for nearly 30 years, and there's some things where I feel incredibly qualified, and there's other things that are adjacent that I feel completely unqualified to be having the conversation. And so, yeah, I mean, there's all these sub-micro specialties within IT because it's such a complex domain. So, yeah, I can see that.
I experience that on a daily basis with some of the massive programs that I work with. And if you come in and you're consulting and being their expert on all these things, there's kind of this assumption of these like layers of an onion, like there are more and more layers that you know about. And I was out at the very edge of my experience set today talking about acquisition strategy. So I'm acquisition adjacent. So be glad to take a couple of these questions. I'm going to go back here and talk to the person who actually knows about those things. So, you're right. It doesn't matter. There are so many nuances and specialities that we have to get into. So that must make it really difficult. The hospitality, it seems like that would be even more diverse to me because you're dealing with an industry whose entire job it is to be hospitable, right?
Yeah.
And that varies by person. So with software, at least my end user is kind of a defined group. I've got 5 or 10 or 1,000 end users of this piece of software. So we're targeting them a little bit more. Seems like it'd be even much more difficult because in hospitality, you're often aimed at a single human, not 100 people or 1,000 people. Like I'm sure that there are more similarities to it, but that to me would seem like it would be a lot more difficult because of that variation.
Yeah. So with chefs, it's like you look for somebody with a very diverse background. And it's not so much in the sense that, they need to know how to code a certain thing because otherwise it won't work correctly. chefs very much so work on the fly. So if they maybe know just a little bit of Mediterranean, but were classically trained in French, then they can integrate those two things. You know, it's not so black and white. It's not, you have to know this coding and that and this. It's
Right.
like, well, you know a little bit of it. An executive chef position that you need to know the back of the house and how to run it, then how to cook, because you have about anywhere between 5 to 10 cooks under you that know how to cook the things that you probably could use some help on.
There was another question I asked you though that I thought was really important too, was, you know, what's a good indicator for a good chef?
Yeah, so a good indicator for a good chef, and I waver on this a lot because, you know, you can talk to somebody on the phone so many times, but you won't actually know until they're in the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say probably the best indicator is probably one who's humble. Most of the best chefs out there are actually quite humble. I mean, take Thomas Keller, for example. I forget who used to run Nobu, but he was definitely not humble, and now Nobu is underwater. So it's just, you know, chefs that can kind of go with the flow, have a proven history of going through turbulence and being able to make it out, still coming up in profit and stuff like that. You know, that's kind of where I see the best chefs, ones that, you know, are very teamwork oriented and not so much about them, more about the restaurant.
Yeah, and I was really, I mean, that's the ethos of the Defense Unicorns too, right? Is that it's egoless, right? We're all on the same team. We all have things we're good or bad at, and if it becomes about us, we're going to fail. I mean, you know, it's not about me. It's about what I can contribute to the team, and I like those parallels there. That it's not about that chef. It's about the team that chef can forge is what's going to get him like a Michelin star versus.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
You know, I was going to hop right in there and poke at you and say, wait, no ego with you, Bryan, there. But you're right. There's a time where we joke about ego. We joke about personas. There's a time to truly set that aside. And, you know, that resonates. I loved what I've been seeing from the outside for Defense Uniform and what I've been exposed to through my friendship and my colleague here with Bryan. It's also true almost regardless as to the business these days, because there's so much bravado. I want someone to be there who cares, has empathy, and cares about those around them. And so it's humble doesn't mean that they lack confidence. Humble means that, you know, it doesn't mean that at all. Humble means that they're not there to toot their own horn endlessly, but they're there to get the job done. Is that how you define it? Is that how you think about it?
Yeah, 100%. Because, you know, I personally, I've never worked in the kitchen up until very recently. The chef that I work under right now, I mean, it's unheard of, the culture that's in this kitchen. You know, they say a lot of chefs, anywhere between 70 to 80% of chefs have mental health issues because of the environment that they're in. And so, you know, walking into this kitchen that I just started, it's like the chef there he cares so much for his team because he understands that his team is what keeps the restaurant afloat. Not just him, but keeps the restaurant afloat. It's truly a team effort. He doesn't see himself as any higher or any lower. He includes everybody, and it really makes for a very smooth running restaurant when everybody feels as an equal.
So is the stress, is the mental health challenge for the chefs, is it toxicity from the top down? Is it the pace, right? Because I think software is bad. I can't imagine dealing with myself. I can't imagine serving me or making something for me. Is there a common theme, or is it kind of a mix depending on where they're working?
I would say down at the root of it, it's probably a common theme. You know, it's either bad ownership who thinks they know more than they actually do, or, you know, an executive chef who thinks too highly of himself that is like pushing everybody to be their workhorse, you know.
This doesn't sound at all like software.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. What? Yes, it does. It sounds exactly like software, which is, Bryan, why it was, I can see why you were so enthused, because the parallels are uncanny, right? You've got the architect or the engineer who absolutely knows everything, and it's that bravado and not having empathy, not caring about the opinions of the other people, and just kind of glossing over it, steamrolling, you know, other
You got
people.
the management that thinks they know more because they're management, even though they have an MBA and have never picked up a keyboard.
Exactly. They're tech adjacent and believe that they are tech owner. So wow. And pace is always, it's a challenge for all of us. It really is. I was doing some research this weekend on generative AI. Long story short, there are concerns about all these productivity gains we're going to get. So imagine you can use Chat GPT to help you write your code. You can use it in all these different ways. You can use these large language models. And there are some growing studies, they're in their infancy, that say we're taking more time to try and make something easier for us. And now we're actually introducing more cognitive overload, more stress, more pace, because it can help you be even faster. You can get more productive. And I'm like, look, we're already pushing code out the door same day. Like, how far are we going to go? And so I've been thinking about that over the last 24, 48 hours, about the constant pace that we're all under. And I don't know of any industry that doesn't have, maybe chicken farming. I don't know. It doesn't have quite the same pace. That was an inside joke. You got that right. So yeah, do you think there's any place that doesn't have that kind of a pace or a speed aspect to it, that pressure to be productive?
You know, I think about that so often because, you know, mental health is a huge thing for everybody nowadays. Mm-hmm. And it's because everything used to be so slow. It used to be so easy and not so stressful. But now, I mean, everybody, I mean, especially in a restaurant, even a customer sits down, if they don't get their water within 5 minutes, all hell's going to break loose. And when you think about it, the customer is coming in because they're hungry. They're not coming in because they might be hungry in 10 minutes. They're coming in because they're hungry. So if you're slow in service, I mean, you're going to get a mouthful. And it's like, you know, it's crazy because everybody is so rushed that it just rushes everybody else. And it's just a never ending cycle.
Does that ever make the kitchen, do they ever compromise? I'm thinking about this, Bryan, follow my logic here in terms of tech debt, in terms of having to make some fast judgments. It's better for me to get this to the table in this amount of time. Therefore, I'm not going to put this extra little bit of dressing, decorative, you know, the plate decorations and all those beautiful things. Do you think that, do the chefs sometimes make those kinds of decisions? Do you think, like, I have to compromise here? I don't know what it would be. I have no idea how a chef would compromise. Hopefully they're still cooking the meat to temperature. Yeah. But we make those choices in software all the time, and we don't always tell other people about it. We should always be telling people about it, because in tech, it racks up over time.
But you know, from what I know, and I'm not in the industry, but I'm alive and I've seen things about chefs, right? Is that what the thing that separates a high performing chef from a low performing chef is consistent quality.
Mm.
Yeah.
Right? You can't be inconsistent because you're under stress, because then you're not a high performing chef. And if you want a Michelin star, you have to have consistent quality.
Yeah. Then that would make me wonder about the additional stressors. And this comes from all the food channel that I watch, and how they have those, what is it? Beat Bobby Flay, like all these things where they're trying to go very fast. You're
Yeah.
right that they don't compromise, but they don't compromise in the quality, but they are looking for ways to accelerate.
Mhm.
So not the same as compromising per se, but what's the order that I'm doing this, and how am I stacking these things, and where do these things need to be in proximity to each other so that I can, get all of these things dealt with in the right amount of time.
So Maria and I were talking about Pico de Gallo earlier. You should tell that story.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. So as I mentioned, recently started working in a kitchen. It's my very first kitchen job. I'm in culinary school. I thought, I'm going to be hopefully externing at the French Laundry at the end of my culinary school stuff. So I should probably work in a kitchen beforehand. So then that way I don't get super stressed out in a Michelin kitchen at my externship. So my first day was tasked to make pico. I don't know if you guys have made pico. It's super simple. Okay, super simple. It's just tomato, jalapeno, onions, and spices, right? So I'm sitting there, knife in hand, chopping up like 40 to 50 tomatoes. And then I got to work on the onions. And I'm sitting there for like an hour and a half. And then finally, chef comes up to me and he's like, "Hey, Maria, did you know that we have a slicer and a dicer?" And I was like, no, I had no clue. Culinary school taught me that I needed to know this because this is what I would be doing. So I assumed this is what I should have been doing.
Cutting it with your knife.
Yeah. And like, it's just expediting those processes in a kitchen. That's just so dire and important. And like you mentioned, like having everything in its place, it's actually a term in the culinary industry. It's called mise en place. And it's the French term, says everything in its place. So in order for everything to be as smooth running in the kitchen, everything does need to be in its place. And I live by this. Like it makes everything so much smoother and faster and easier to manage, honestly. It's not very applicable to, your home kitchen, but if you're producing things on a mass scale, it's very important to have your mise en place. Because then that way, when you need it, it's ready and available. You're not stressing yourself out like, oh, I need more pico because it needs to go on this plate. It's already done. It's already there and available,
And I can tie this back to continuous delivery, right? Because cool, you've got the slicer and the dicer available, but then you don't have the setup done to have the materials available to use those. You have to go scramble and get them. The tools didn't really help you that much, right? Yeah. And in continuous delivery, people always focus on the automation to build and deploy stuff instead of the rest of the workflow, which is having the right information coming in at the right time, in the right sequence, broken down to the right level, the team working together to get that done. That's the mise en place for software delivery, right? If you're going to deliver at scale, you have to have a very disciplined, organized approach. You can't just half-ass wing it.
Right. Your entire value chain has to be well understood. You had very, very good point there, folks in the tech. And this, Maria, for me, you're so embedded with tech, with your fiance and having been a tech recruiter. People go into, when they start talking about continuous integration, continuous delivery, they hyper focus on the tools, they hyper focus on the automations, because a lot of times that feels like a quick win. Because we know we're manually doing this stuff right now. Boy, if I could just get this automated, And my analogy to that is an experience that I had this morning. Literally, when my house, I may or may not have way too many Amazon Echo units in various places. And recently, because I believe it's because I've been working with other generative AI tools, the particular one that is in my office has decided that she will no longer listen to me. So I found myself trying to turn a light on, and a command that I say 3 or 4 times a day, the exact same command, didn't understand it, didn't get it. And I found myself wasting time yelling at this box. Now, what I need to do is, if I picked up my laptop and moved my camera around, you'd see that it's about 3 feet from that unit to the actual light switch where I could have flipped it off and on. And yet I was in this frustration mode because I wanted to use the tool. And there was a point where the tool wasn't doing what I needed it to do. I needed to bail on that. So that's my really contrived. But yes, I was swearing at her this morning. My husband heard me, came running in. What's going on in here? I said, I'm fighting with her again. She's not listening to me.
Now, that was something else we were talking about before we started recording, was that if you bring a group of people who aren't really a team and don't really know how to cook very well anyway, and bring them into a high-end kitchen with all the latest stuff, it'll still be garbage.
Yeah, like me on my first day when I was sitting there trying to slice tomatoes with a knife instead of using the tools that were available to me.
Yeah. Well, what is it? A fool with a tool is still a fool. Like if tools can be in the hands of the right person, in the hands of the right talent, or introduced to somebody and they start to learn how to use those tools. Those are good situations, but the tool in and of itself, to your point, it can't do the job without the humans. It can't do the job without the humans. So you guys, all right. So we've talked about the toxicity. We've talked about the management aspect. We've talked about tools. We've talked about the humbleness of hiring, which really has me thinking. Bryan, I'm sure that you had other questions that you were teasing out with Maria.
I was enjoying the parallels, the just going back and forth and talking about the different things that were identical between the two totally unrelated industries. Right.
They have humans.
And to me, and Maria, you haven't known me for very long, but I emulate empathy.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
I am not naturally a people person.
No, he's not.
That whole thing about, high performing chefs know how to build good teams and they don't see themselves above, but as a team member. Yeah, that's not a lesson that I learned until I was nearly 20 years into my career. I was old school, do what I say because I'm the tech lead. Mm-hmm. Right. And only managed to grow a high performing team because I was in a situation where I didn't actually know the tech stack we were in, and we were all learning a new way of working all at the same time. And so I had no choice but to be humble and found out that was a much more effective way to work. Right. But, and all that to say that it's, over the years, I've come to realize it's a people problem. It has nothing to do with the technology or the tools we use. It's all about people. And so these parallels I find really entertaining now, because now that's the problem I study, is the people problem. How do we create the right incentives and the right environment so people can be at their very best all the time?
Well, and I'm going to track that back. I've been working with 2 different universities. I'm looking at their curriculum and understanding. So they're cranking out these computer science majors, they're cranking out these folks. Like, how do we improve this? And one of them, honest to goodness, one of these universities said, we got to better figure out how to estimate, because the problem is they don't know how to estimate, so they don't know how to get home at night. I'm like, that's not the problem. There are 2 things. One is, in technology in specific, it is changing super frequently. So you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable constantly. It's always like your shoes don't quite fit. You're just always, they work, but they're not, you never are quite in a super comfort zone. Or if you are comfortable, you're comfortable for about 5 minutes. But the other part of it is, get used to being uncomfortable, constant learning, and you have to understand and be focused on people. I've done some amazing projects and we've gone into these points where they're not doing so well. And it's always because of humans. It's never the, we're completely failing because the technology is that bad. Yeah, sometimes there are bad tech choices, but it's almost always the toxicity happens because the humans in the mix, or the other challenges. I like how you said that you end up, Bryan, studying how to be empathetic. I remember you telling me stories about you not being empathetic, and kind of like, what would an empathetic person do? Well, if I were empathetic, if I actually gave a darn, here's how I should behave, and actually taught yourself that. And that it's actually really cool, and probably one of the skills that I'm, as I'm talking to these 2 universities, they need to be talking about the human element. I don't remember any tech schools, any technical programs actually focusing on talking about human interaction. There might be something about public speaking here or there, but that was about it. There was nothing about team building. There was nothing about empathy. There was nothing about leadership. There was nothing about cognitive overload. Zero.
There's like nothing that's really useful that's built today that's built by a single person working in isolation.
Right.
Right. Software is far too complex for that.
I guess that's a lot like a restaurant now.
You what?
That's a lot like a kitchen, actually.
Yeah.
No, it is.
You'd have to be in a really tiny kitchen to only have one person working in the kitchen. There's a sushi restaurant down the street from us that's a really tiny space. I mean, it's basically a converted garage. There's even a rolling door. And it's the best sushi I've had outside of Japan. Okay.
In Arkansas, in Bentonville.
No, it's the best sushi I've had outside of Japan. Not in Arkansas, outside of Japan.
Outside of Japan. Okay.
Okay. And it might seat 30 people, maybe. And there's 3 people in the kitchen.
Yeah.
It's a team. They're going to crank it out. And not counting the wait staff.
So the best sushi I've ever had was actually in Oklahoma, which I don't understand it. So I've decided not to question it, not going to question it. That was where it was. Your point about there being fewer people, right? The only time you ever don't have a big collaboration is if it's truly a single shop. You know, there are those restaurants now, I can't remember the name of it, where it's like a chef seating, where literally you go in and they're cooking, you know, one meal and there are 2 or 3 seatings and that's it. I think that's like the only time you would get that kind of unique experience. And that is done that way specifically for the unique experience of it. It's not trying to serve multiple people at a time, right? Many people. It's not based on working folks through number of seats per hour, anything like that. It's a very different kind of experience. So the kind of restaurant that you're in right now, Maria, what kind of restaurant is it? Is it a Mexican restaurant, did you say, or is it a Spanish background?
So it's on Google considered a gastropub.
Okay.
I would not consider it that. I honestly, I was a huge foodie prior to, being in the kitchen in any aspect. And I thought I had a favorite restaurant here in Arizona until I started working there. Like, not to be biased or anything, but the food there is unparalleled to any place. And I have gone to Arizona. It's
okay.
Just,
that went a whole different way than where I thought you were going to take it from what you said. Like,
yeah.
I was a foodie. I was a foodie until I worked here. Now my teeth, now my taste buds are gone. They're dead. I got nothing left. That's where my brain went when you said that.
Yeah,
so.
I really thought I knew of all the hot restaurants in Arizona, but that place by far is the best. They have a wide variety of things. They have things like poke. They have braised beef. It's just across the board and everything's good. It's like you can't go wrong with anything you order.
Sounds wonderful.
I'm so impressed with that place.
Sounds wonderful. Pulling us back to similarities. Do you see with chefs kind of a changing of styles that is coming with the changing of generations? Like
100%.
Okay. Talk a little bit about that. I'm dying to see what you're seeing.
So, it's like I mentioned previously, it's kind of like common knowledge for chefs to have some sort of mental health issue. There's a lot of projects out there. One of the more notable ones is called the Burnt Chef Project. And they essentially help chefs with their issues and stuff like that, and supply therapists and stuff. It's really a beautiful project. I applaud it every day that I see it. But with that, you have this new generation of people coming in that see how toxic and terrible the whole culture is. I mean, I'm personally terrified to work in a Michelin rated restaurant. The finer dining it is, the more toxic you assume it to be.
Oh,
Yeah. I mean, when I think of a Michelin rated restaurant, I think of a executive chef who's cursing and angry and throwing things and frustrated because everything has to be perfect.
Now, wait a minute. You might be showing your bias a little bit there, because and I don't know. I'm listening to you say that. I don't think of that. Like when I think of a Michelin restaurant, I don't think of those nasty chef shows where the guys are throwing things around. I think of somebody who is super, super high strung and not always communicative, like way focused on what they're doing. But I don't necessarily think about them like ruling with an iron fist. And that's probably because you know how many Michelin restaurants I go to.
Well, and how many of the kitchens have you worked in?
Well, that would be zero.
Yeah. I mean, but like in a real aspect, you think about how, you know, in order to maintain a Michelin star, you know, like Bryan had mentioned, it's all about consistency. That's one of the main things that will get you a Michelin star. If you're not absolutely consistent across the board, I mean, you're not getting a Michelin star, you know, and people who are so determined to get that, it's just to try to attain perfection to begin with is insanity. You know what I mean? So trying to maintain perfection for that long to achieve the Michelin star or to keep the Michelin star, it's like that type of stress builds, you know, and you take it out on your, let's say somebody didn't make the sauce correctly, or they didn't make it in time, or they broke the sauce and now they have to do it again. So now a plate's going to go out late. That chef has to deal with those little tiny hiccups all throughout the day.
Okay. All right. I can start to understand that then. Yeah. The other question I have around generations is, do you see a Gen X chef and a millennial chef? Are their cooking styles different? Are the way that they come in, not just how they're coming at, like, you know, their intensity, but are there actually stylistic differences in, you know, have they been taught kind of differently, or is it more timeless? Like, because I can tell you in software, I can talk to somebody, I can tell pretty much their age by the way that they talk about software, because they learned during this 10-year time span. They were in their mid-20s during that time span, and it's indelible. So I'm kind of wondering if that happens, you know, if you see that with the changing of the generations and with chefs and with cooks.
Absolutely. So, you know, like you mentioned, a lot of things are timeless. A lot of chefs say that, you know, tradition is essential. Simplicity is very essential in great cooking. And in some sense, that's kind of true. But if you want to elevate it to a certain form, and I've seen a lot of chefs on TikTok, I mean, a lot of them take super simple recipes and just create it in such a way that it's so aesthetically pleasing. And like, it's just, it really blows my mind what chefs are coming up with these days, where a lot of other older chefs might say, you know, this is too much. You need to stick to how it's made.
Oh, more of a traditionalist. Okay.
Yeah.
Like Bryan, like you have to have comments in the code. I might be baiting Bryan and some other folks online just a little bit about.
You know, you could just write expressive tests and expressive code and then not worry about things you can't test.
I personally love tests as my documentation. If I can provide you with a test that explains how the code is supposed to work. But I digress into dork things, and I don't know, Maria.
I have another question, because Maria, you were talking about earlier, you know, you really wanted to get across some of the things that you wish you'd known earlier on that around recruiting that you could like share to help other people.
Yeah, so that's a great question. When I first got into IT recruiting, I mean, I'll tell you, it was the bane of my existence. I loved it, but man, it was hard because first of all, I'm coming in from as a recruiter who worked, with farmers insurance and a few bars here and there, but like going into the IT industry, there's a lot of things that, a recruiter, especially a novice recruiter, somebody who's never been in the IT recruiting firm or industry, instead of trying to understand what people do, you need to have them explain it to you.
Mm-hmm.
Have them explain to you what they do. If they explain it well, then first of all, they're not full of shit, like you had asked before, Bryan. If they just kind of run around the subject and you still don't really get an answer, then you can be pretty dang sure that they don't know what they're doing and you're just assuming, this is how it would be done.
So I got to know, at the end of an interview sequence for a chef, I'm assuming that somebody actually makes food and somebody actually tastes the food. Like, I know that sounds silly, but I never thought about it until this moment, because it's like, I am Bryan Finster. I am the great and wonderful. So you should hire me in. Like, that's great. We will bring you in.
Before you answer, well, because you nodded, and that's yes, there's but I bet you that what they don't do with a head chef is give them a test about how fast they can dice an onion.
Yeah.
Well, they might.
Yeah.
And if they start chopping really fast, they're like, we have one of these tools over here. Oh yeah, I know, but I prefer to do this.
Exactly. But to what you said, Bryan, a lot of chefs actually aren't good chefs are very hands-on. They try to be hands-on in the kitchen, but in a traditional kitchen, you have what's called a French brigade. So you have the cook, the line cook, the sous chef, the executive chef, and it's everybody else's job to do the mundane tasks and the chef's job to run the financials, the actual operations and stuff like that of the restaurant. So it's like way different. I'm pretty positive almost none of those chefs know how to dice an onion anymore.
That's interesting. In software.
So there's not like a elite chef.
So at the end of an interview process for an executive chef, they do have them come in for a tasting. Now that I think about it, I'm not sure if they are given a staff, for their tasting. If they do it on their own, I'm so much more impressed than I was before, but
interesting.
Yeah, they do go in for a tasting and cook everything.
You've coming up with a whole bunch of ideas for, hold on, Bryan. I've got a whole bunch of ideas for tech hiring now.
So there's this thing, that's that people rant against all the time in the tech industry, where they send you leak code problems, which are coding kata that have nothing to do with your job at all. It's just, can you solve this esoteric problem?
Right.
How I was like, okay, but
can you dice this tomato? Can you dice this tomato is what it is. It's can you dice the damn tomato?
You have to study for a test for something that you don't ever do in your daily job. And that's how they judge whether or not you're going to be good at the daily work.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like bringing in somebody who's a French chef and trying to see how well they can roll tamales or something.
Yeah. Exactly.
No.
And it's definitely a chef's job to know multiple different cuisines, especially once you're at the executive chef level, So I had a few clients that would bring chefs out and, very last minute be like, oh, by the way, this guest has celiac and disease, and this guest can't have meat. So do with that what you will. Give us a meal in about 30, 40 minutes.
Now you're making me really start to appreciate some of these goofy shows on the Food Network. So
yeah,
where they give you the basket, you have the big reveal, and you open up the basket, and they've put 5 ingredients in there, and they're whacked out ingredients. Plus, there's the one malicious plant. So your opponent gets to pick one extra ingredient that goes into your basket, and same vice versa. And you open it up, but these people come up with amazing things. Like it just seems like maliciousness. But that really happens. I mean, you have that all the time with people with different food allergies and different, conditions, different likes and dislikes. Got to be able to react to that. That's pretty interesting. I never thought about the complexities of hiring a chef. I was just thinking, yeah, I ate at the restaurant over here and he did really great. So obviously they're going to do even better at this newer restaurant that has an influx of money and, whatever. So
Yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So guys, in my world, I'm East Coast. It is 8:26 and I am out. I need this. I even ate, I don't know if you noticed, I was munching on all those little berries that were in there. So
Berries.
yes, I was didn't see me popping them in my pie hole here. I was.
Even notice.
So, I have really appreciated tonight. It has been a whole lot of fun. I would love to have you back again and chat more. This has been a hoot. For all of our listeners, please give us your comments. Please subscribe. Please reach out to us. Toss us questions, softballs or hard ones. It doesn't matter. Also, we'll have the contact information for Maria out there, especially if you want to know more about all the cool stuff that she's doing in her world and living as a chef, tech adjacent. I think there's going to be a lot of good stuff to come out of there. Maria, thank you for taking time with us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. I love this so much. This is great.
Yeah, thanks. It was really good having, a non-tech person that we have so much in common with.
Tech adjacent. Yeah. Thank you. Tech adjacent.
Yeah.
Thank you. Tech adjacent. Because in these worlds, in this time, there is nobody that's truly non-technical. No, yeah, maybe somebody in the middle of the Amazon jungle.
There are microwaves to be programmed. That's true.
There are. I saw what you did there. Finster. All right, gang. Thanks again, and I appreciate everybody being here tonight. Good night.
Night.